So what now? You've been studying for that PM job, that PM interview, you went through the whole process, you've been looking at different types of job, and now you finally actually got it. This might be your first PM job, or you might have been PM for a while, but I think that first few months is always a period of new, of change, of trying to figure out how to get your ground and get on a running start. And so I'll be talking about 30, 60, 90-day plan for new PMs, along with some of my learnings doing this at companies of different sizes, on different teams, some of the things I have learned that are good to do, some of the mistakes I have made and also have seen others make to get the most out of this really crucial, critical period of time. And so 30, 60, 90 days is a period of time that is really significant because people are getting their first impression of you. People form first impressions very quickly, and then they build the rest of their interpretation of who you are as a product manager and as a person on top of that first impression that they got. And so it's a time that you can really set yourself up for success, but it's also a time that you're able to ask questions and learn and absorb pretty much without judgment, in the sense that you're not expected to be the expert yet. You're not expected to really know very much of anything. And so any question you ask is essentially for free. And it's also a time that you can really stand out and ramp up to make yourself the expert at that 90-day period and put yourself in a good place for the future. So I'll talk first a little bit about some high-level goals for this period of time, and then some specific examples of what you could do at 30, at 60, and 90 days, and then some of the mistakes that I have observed and have made myself. So let's get started with high-level goals. Really, first and foremost, more important than anything, is building relationships. Relationships are the currency of a product manager. It's what they use to accomplish everything, because you're not the architect, you're not the builder, you're not the designer, you're not the salesperson, you're not the customer service person. You're the one who brings all of these different experts together and makes a cohesive product out of it. And so you really need to know who knows what, where does certain knowledge live, who am I dependent on, who are my dependencies, who's expecting something from me, and figure out that landscape of people, and then build trust with them. Building trust with them consists of a few different things, including being curious, being willing to learn, being likable, showing that you're willing to show up and work hard, and a lot of it has to do with your reputation. So that's a part two, is build out your reputation. And reputation is really resting upon quite a few things, but the most important one of them is that you do what you say. You build accountability, you build credibility that your word has meaning. And so how do you do what you say? First of all, it's obvious. Don't say something that you can't do. And then second of all, if you do say something that you can't do, then come with a plan. Hey, I was going to do this, circumstances changed, XYZ happened, and here's my new plan. Here's what I'm going to do instead. Here's what I'm going to do it instead. I made a mistake, and here's what I learned from it, and here's what I'm going to do next. So always, always make a reputation that you do what you say 100% of the time. And that also comes with signing up for the right things and not over signing up for, not overcommitting yourself to more things than you can do. And so if you start out and people are like, wow, this person, they're really credible, they're really reliable, they can trust you to ask you for things that they need, they can trust you to depend on you to deliver the work, and that's really the foundation for, being a competent part of the team. And then beyond that, of course, there's other characteristics, such as really having curiosity, asking questions, trying to understand things. Maybe they're things that you directly need, and maybe they're peripheral things that contribute to your understanding of what the product is. So the technology, the competitors, what this person does, being personable and asking about people's lives and, their families, what they do, building up that connection. I would say this is a really great period of time to meet everyone, because later you're going to get busy. And so it can be hard to sort of set up that first meeting with somebody when you're at the 90-day mark. But early on, you have free time, you have an open calendar, so shadow people, really get to meet them, get to know them, have coffees with them, and present yourself as a likable person so that when it gets tougher and you start asking for things, that foundation is already there. So you've built relationships, you found out who knows what, you've built your reputation as a credible person. The third thing is to learn about the product, the user, the company. So the most important part of this is really the user and the product. Who is your user? What do they want? Why do they use this product? What value does this product bring to them? That is what you're going to be expected to be the expert on, because people are spending their time doing technical work in most of the cases, or doing like very specific, design or architecting work. And so the value that you bring to the company is being the voice of the customer and being able to know every detail of what the value and meaning of this product to the customer is in and out, and answering questions about like, why are we doing this? What is going to be the result of doing this? And being able to speak to that. So this is a time to know your user and know your customer. And again, like reading through these types of research and reading through user studies, watching videos, it takes time. And so the 30-day period is really better than any other time to dive into that and spend all the time that you can. Because later, when people start asking you questions at 60 or 90 days and beyond, in the beginning is the only time period that you have a free pass, that you're new. But after that, people are going to ask questions, why don't you know that? You're the product manager. So take the opportunity, take the time that you have to become the expert on the product and the user very quickly. Last but not least, in fact, you should do this fairly early on, the fourth one, which is align expectations with your manager. Figure out what are the specific SMART goals that you're going to set for 30, 60, 90 days. What are kind of the accomplishments of each month? And align your ideas of what success really means. So your manager, whether they have explicitly written it down or said it somewhere or not, they have a point of view around what would make you a successful hire, what would sort of make you worth the money, worth the investment that they've made so far. And so every single manager, every single person has a different definition of what that is. And so you want to align how do they see it and make sure that information comes to you. And so usually that comes in the form of something that you needed to create or achieve by a certain day. Maybe there's a document that you need to get reviewed by leadership at the 60-day mark, or maybe there's, a feature that you need to ship on XYZ timeframe, and so you need to set up the foundations for that. But really align where does your manager expect you to be at those time periods, and that helps to clarify your life because you know where you're moving. And so if you don't have that conversation explicitly, and if your manager doesn't schedule it with you, you need to schedule it, that puts you at the risk of working really hard and trying and doing your best, but moving in a totally different direction than your manager might be expecting. The other thing I would say about this is, especially as you get into more senior positions and into larger companies, the manager of a product manager is not the only person influencing what they do and what their work is. For me, for example, my manager is one out of many inputs, and I think especially if you're having a senior position, for a PM, the business influences what you're supposed to be doing. The customer influences what sort of the needs of the product are. And maybe there are senior leaders or VPs or some other people that have a huge influence on your job as well. And so you want to take that plan of like, hey, at 30 days I want to get here, at 60 days I want to have these deliverables and so forth, and share that plan about what you think success in your role looks like with other key people that you've identified. So maybe that's the engineering manager, maybe that's the leader of design, maybe that's the skip level, maybe that's other dependent teams that you work with or that, support different parts of your product. You want to make sure that everybody that you are interacting with and depending on is excited about this sort of path that you're going on. Because sometimes managers don't really provide this 30, 60, 90 day plan. Sometimes they don't think about it thoroughly, or maybe they didn't do a good one. And so with such a cross-disciplinary and highly dependent role as a product manager, you want to make sure that all of the stakeholders are having the same viewpoint that was sort of given to you at that time period. So with that said, let's give a few examples of things that you could do during each of the phases, 30, 60, 90 days. So first of all, your team, your product is embedded within a larger organization, and it can be very helpful to understand what is really the objective of that organization. So for example, is the business that you're in, whether it's a company or if you're in a bigger company, then maybe it's the org, are they trying to grow? Are they trying to get revenue? Are they trying to build engagement? Are they trying to move into a new segment or like a new market? Or example, in my past role, an example of the strategy was they were shifting from hardware-driven revenue to software-driven revenue and trying to create recurring revenue and subscription services. So that was kind of the broader business context that my product was operating within. And that can really help you to understand where the product strategy of your product is coming from and what are kind of the long-term outcomes that you're a part of. And especially companies usually do, longer-term planning that you will get more and more involved in as a product manager over time. And so it's really important to be able to be a critical thinker and see where the value that you're delivering sits inside of a larger organizational roadmap and strategy. The next thing is to understand the specific process of your team and how that team works. And there's a grain of salt to add to this, but I would say, every team is different. And for example, my last job, I spent a lot of time in Jira and making tickets for engineers and looking at bugs and really kind of looking at the technical execution side of things and doing strategy only in specific contexts. Versus in another team, I had to take on such a broad scope that there wasn't time to get as deep. And so I spent a lot more of my time setting goals or working on strategic documents or aligning with other teams, and then handed over like the execution of day-to-day, what are engineers working on this day to the software development manager who knew just my general high-level kind of outcomes, and then managed the day-to-day work with the engineers on his own, or the same type of thing with a technical product manager. So understand Like, what is really the role of the product manager in that specific team and company? And what are the kind of things that you're expected to do versus not do? Like, where do those boundaries lie? For example, with that, technical example, in some cases, the engineers who are having a PM that works very closely may expect the product manager to write their stories and write their tickets and write their epics and like pretty much like curate all of their work perfectly for them. And then in another team, it may be totally the opposite, because the engineer who's used to figuring everything out on their own, and even in some cases expanding into more product decision making when it gets to kind of that more granular scale, if you start doing that, they're going to be like, whoa, man, back off. Like, this is my job. Don't step on my toes. And so before you start doing everything, it's great to get that alignment around what does the specific scope of this role and this particular type of product management look at this company. Now, I'll touch again on the piece I mentioned before, which is the knowing your customer. The 30-day period is really the time to know your customer and know your product. So some examples of things you could do is, and it depends because companies may have varying levels of documentation on this, but read the user research, read the user studies, look at the designs of the product, buy the product if you can and use it, click on it, go on every screen of it, test it out, do every possible use case that you can with the product. If this is a larger company or like a product that you can, ask your friends or any peers or like anybody you can find that has used the product, talk to them and ask them. If there's videos of user interviews, find those. If there's reviews online about people using the product or maybe Reddit board discussions, find those. Find the customer care or the customer support people and ask them about like what are the issues with the product, what are people saying, can I look at what people are saying about the product. Talk to the marketing people, talk to the sales people. Every single ounce of knowledge you can find about the product and the user and what the user wants, pull that out, and especially lean on as much as you can using the product yourself if that's possible. If you find that the body of knowledge about what the product is or why it's valuable or how users would use it is not there, that may be a gap. And while I wouldn't advocate trying to like stir the boat within your first 30 days on most things, this is actually one that if there isn't anything in place to learn from your customer or create the voice of the customer, start just doing this right away. Like start saying, hey, we need user interviews, we need XYZ, because there's no point to product managers who cannot hear the voice of their customer. And so this is definitely something that you'll be able to provide value setting up for the company. I would recommend to document this as much as you can, create that body of knowledge, have people to quiz you on this. And this also is knowing the product inside and out. And so the inside is the technical setup of the product, the architecture, the design, the services it uses, the tech stack. Usually as a PM, you'll need to be able to speak to all of that and why it is the way it is. And in many cases, the tech stack also influences certain aspects of the product. So for example, maybe it's using an old service, and because the service is very old, it's hard to make changes, and that kind of affects the pace of the product. You'll need to learn that kind of thing. Maybe you're migrating from one platform to another, or maybe you're migrating from a monolith to a microservices architecture. Or in my case, for example, I work with products that sit on top of hardware. So some hardware may have like a long battery life and a high processing power and lots of RAM and lots of CPU. And other types of products that I manage may have like very constrained environments. So how do those setups look? How do they influence the product? What is the OS that it lives on? How does that influence it? It may definitely be overwhelming to learn about this. So maybe find some technical experts that you can and just let them talk at you, listen to it, write everything down, and every single word that you don't know, look it up and figure it out. For example, in one of the products I worked on when I was less technical, we had to use a pub sub system, and I had to research like, what is that? What is the significance of it? How is it used in microservice architectures and so forth? And I didn't know anything about that at the time. I read some Wikipedia articles, I read some books, I watched some YouTube videos, I found a book about this topic, and then, now I have that knowledge under my belt, and so when the conversation gets more technical, and when I'm supposed to actually contribute to it at the 60-90 day mark, that knowledge is kind of under my belt. So don't feel too overwhelmed, because this hieroglyphics of knowledge is going to become more clear as time goes on, but definitely understand that understanding the technical landscape is part of your responsibility. Now, the 60-day period is where you start to move from being a sponge and learning things and absorbing to really kind of aligning more into what is your role, what is your team's role, what is the value that you're going to bring, and how does that play into certain plans and roadmaps. So at this point in time, you should be able to articulate your roadmap and strategy pretty clearly. Usually you wouldn't have created something from scratch. There's something already there for you to work with, but you should understand why is it like that? Why were those pieces decided? What's going to be next? And like really understand like why are things the way that they are? And what is going to be your contribution to it? In addition, this is the period of time that you start to form an opinion on things. maybe you were learning, about this and that before, and you're just kind of absorbing, but now you have to have a point of view of like, okay, well, these are the features that matter. These are the use cases that matter. This is what the data says that customers will prioritize. And so really moving into a person who can articulate like what their product strategy is going to be and what their stance is, since you have now more of that body of the voice of the user. At this point, you probably have a better understanding of the technology. You're beginning to take over more of the responsibility from somebody else who you have been working with. And you might be creating roadmap artifacts. So whether that's adding lines to the roadmap or documenting the roadmap or creating tickets for engineers, but you're beginning to get more into that creation of high-level deliverables. So finally, as you get to 90 days, this is really the execution period. So hopefully at the beginning of this time period, you sat down with your manager and you had that conversation with him and other people about what is the role that you play and what are the SMART goals that you have for every month and for these periods of time. And so now you should have achieved a number of them and be getting close to the level of the output that was sort of set out, or understand why is there a delta and, what are the new goals that have been set. Because in my experience, the 30-90 plan can be a guess, and so you kind of see how things pan out and adjust over time. But you should be moving into deliverables. At this point, likely you have submitted some sort of item, whether it be a feature or a plan or a requirements document or a strategy document. So for example, one of the goals I had for my 60-day period was to deliver a product requirements or kind of like product strategy document and get that reviewed. At this point in time, you would be having some of those deliverables. And I would recommend starting just way earlier than you feel comfortable with it. So for example, if you know by 60-day mark, you need to submit a document, start writing that document on like day 2. And you will run into the fact that you don't know how to write that document, you don't know the structure, you don't know what to write about, but just write like the worst version of that document in existence and deliver it. And people are not going to judge you because you've been there for 2 weeks, but just get a feel for what the process is like. And then by the time that you're sort of doing it for real with that initial first month or 2 of knowledge, you already have a round under your belt and you kind of know how to navigate it. My mistake has definitely been putting off this process for too long. And then it just like gets scarier and scarier over time to really get into deliverables. So start early, put yourself out there early, and then take the feedback and learn from it with a positive attitude. So now hopefully you have a sense of what those 30, 60, 90 days can look like. And I'll just share some mistakes or things I have learned in my process of doing it. So here's a couple. First is setting goals in the beginning, those SMART goals that are not specific enough. For example, I will, get to know people, I'll learn what's going on, and I'll start, creating some deliverables. You need to create a plan which is much more specific than that, about exactly what the deliverable will look like, when it will happen, who is needed for that, what are the sub-milestones to get there. Which are the people that you need to meet. Your manager can provide you a list. You may need to force them to provide you that list. Like, set goals that are very measurable in terms of the outcome. Or maybe even like, I have acquired X number of users or whatever it may be. Make sure that what you aligned on with your manager team or other dependencies in the beginning is very specific so that you continue to stay as closely as possible moving forward by their definition of success at the time period that you're still learning and you're still new. The next mistake I would say is coming in and trying to change too much too quickly. And so there's kind of like both pros and cons of this. So, or like 2 sides of the scale. So one side is coming in and trying to change everything before you even understand it. So it's very critical to observe long enough that you know why things are a certain way, because some things may make no sense the first time you hear about it, but usually you're working with people who are smart and competent, and there were certain reasons that they made that decision. So before you sort of speak up, do the diligence to understand why that decision was made and what was the background and what were the constraints. And then once you have kind of that body of knowledge to back you up, now you can assess whether you still feel that way. I would say most of the time your opinion will change based on that body of knowledge, but sometimes it won't. And so that gets to the other side of the scale. You're not necessarily bound to all of the decisions that were made in the past. So for example, in my case, I'm working on a product that was owned by another product manager who left, and then he was gone for a period of time, like several months, and I came in. And so I came in and I was kind of like, what the heck? A lot of the things I'm seeing don't make any sense. And I didn't want to say anything too soon because, like I said, I want to build up the background. But I took too long to build up the background. And by that time, I kind of got used to how things were running. And I said, okay, well, I'm just going to run with it. I want to like get moving. I want to deliver some stuff. And then I put the doubt that I had to the side. But actually, you're not committed to stick with every decision that was made in the past, especially by people who are no longer there. And so if you got that background knowledge, you understand what's going on, and you still feel that doubt and you still feel like something is wrong, at 60 days, I mentioned that's the time to start forming opinions. That's also the time to say, hey, we should consider adding this to the process. Or, hey, can we start to maybe take another look at this decision, understand what was the basis for it, and evaluate together why. Or maybe you feel even more strongly, you might write a document about a change of plan that you want to make. So don't feel like you are committed to stick with every single decision that was made that led to this moment. Next, I would say a lot of folks say that you should get a quick win in early. And of course, if there's a low-hanging fruit, if there's an obvious thing that you can do to help, do that and it will make a difference. But don't get so over worried about doing that it kind of distracts you or makes you feel like if you didn't get a quick win and you didn't succeed. In my case, there was just an enormous body of knowledge and background to gain, and there were very heavy and large deliverables to sort of get started on. And so there wasn't a great opportunity for a quick win in that particular role, even though it may have been a fit in other onboardings I had done in the past. So don't beat yourself up if there isn't something just easy and low-hanging to grab there. And finally, another mistake that's easy to make is getting too caught up in the action early on and forgetting to do all of the sort of understanding of the user or understanding of the research. So it's very tempting to sort of get moving and start building things and start writing things very quickly. But make sure that you at least know what you don't know and know kind of like that you are spending your time on deliverables, but you still have research to do and you're allocating time for that. Because that first 60 days is so crucial to understanding your user. It's not going to make sense for you to still be getting basic knowledge about who the customer is at 100 days or 200 days. Of course, you will continue learning, but really make sure that you prioritize the time to understand the customer as early on and as quickly as possible. All right, hopefully that gives you a great sense of your 30, 60, 90-day plan, starting from the learn phase where you build your relationships with other people on the team and you build your reputation as an accountable person while learning about the customer and setting goals with your manager. Then moving into the align phase where you begin to form opinions on things or you understand the deeper knowledge, the architecture, and you begin to see how you fit into the roadmap and what role you will play to deliver. And finally, the 90-day period where you begin to have an output and you begin to deliver the results for the goals that you set at the beginning. Hope that helps and good luck on your next steps.